Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second week of CSS. Can I just get a quick hello from everyone just to make sure there's actually other people here? All right. Cool. Looks like there's at least a couple people here. Just check. I'm going to real quickly just take a look at this to see how many people we have on. All right. Cool. About 10 watching now. Awesome. Hello to Gellison and UpFlipD. Everyone else, just feel free to say hello in the chat just to... Cool. Hi, hey, hello. All right, awesome, cool. I'm going to get started since it's noon. And this week we are going to be talking about CSS. And just a quick administrative note. So I recently changed my name when I got married. So last week my GitHub was Jesse Furmanek. This week it is Jesse Lumery. So when you go to look at last week's information, it's going to be at Jesse Lumery instead of Jesse Furmanek as my username. So kind of just a quick point there. Other than that, I think we're going to get started. Sounds like cool. Everyone can hear me. Awesome. All right, cool. I'm going to get started. All right, this week we're talking about CSS, and it's something that I don't work with a ton. When I do front-end work, we tend to do little tweaks, but it was kind of interesting for me to kind of go through and relearn it, so to speak. So the overall plan is we're just going to kind of go over the basics of how it's used, get into specifics about elements, classes, and IDs, and how to select different parts of your HTML to correctly display things that you want. Again, around the half point, I'm gonna kind of have a question time, a short one, and then again after the live coding session. So feel free to ask some questions in the chat. I encourage it. I'll go back through it during the two question sessions and kind of answer those as they come, or rather answer them in those two particular spots. So just let me know in the chat if you have questions, and we'll go from there. Something also a little bit different about this class, while there is going to be a live coding session at the end, it's probably going to be shorter than the other last week's, only because I'm going to really try to live code throughout this, because CSS is one of those things where when you hear the definition, I think it's really great to have it applied right away as opposed to like waiting to the end. So after a very long preamble, what is CSS? CSS is an initialism which stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And what does that mean? And while I'm not going to say that nobody knows what it means, because it does mean something very specific, it is confusing. I'm joking, but I do want to bring up the point is CSS is one of those kind of things that it's a little bit difficult to understand. And we'll get to the cascading style sheet part later, but I think it's more important just to kind of understand like what does CSS do. And so on the left side of the screen, I have Codecademy with all of its CSS strips. So it's Bootstrap CSS, it's like regular CSS, all strip. And you'll notice that like the structure kind of falls apart. The form is kind of janky. The different headers don't look as they do. Like there's no navigation bar. CSS, what it does, as you can see on the right side, adds sort of a little bit of it's a little bit of paint, right? It makes it like look a lot nicer, but it also just makes it more intuitive to the user. So the design is changed in such a way that you're able to kind of interact with the website a little bit better. So instead of having all of your navigation smushed to the left, you can instead style it in this nice bar that makes it easy to know like how to navigate the particular website. I'm also going to do a quick check just to make sure everyone can hear me. Cool, awesome, cool. All right, so let's talk about the syntax of CSS, and this is going to be a bit in the abstract. There are kind of three parts. There are two parts of a declaration. The declaration is a property value pair, And the selector is the part which selects a particular element, class, or ID that the property will apply to. And this all sounds really recursive, so I'm just going to kind of move past the slide to kind of show you what I'm talking about. So you may or may not have seen this before if you've done this week's work, but this is kind of this is a CSS declaration. So here we have the selector, which is saying, all right, for all H1 elements, let's set the property color to blue. So color is the property, blue is the value, and that's kind of the overall way of creating a CSS declaration. You'll note also that there is a semicolon at the end. It's good practice. I mean, you have to put it in for pretty much every single declaration that you make for a particular selector. So it's good to put that there. You technically don't have to put in the last one, but you should just put it for everyone. It's just kind of a better way of going about it. And so similar to the way the DOM is constructed, the document object model, you have this HTML file which is parsed into this document object model tree, and then you have this CSS file or CSS style internal style sheet which is then kind of added to the DOM. And both of these combine and create a display. And there's a lot that goes into this. It's confusing, it's technical. If you are interested, there's kind of a nice little link here that I like to get into, but I would not worry about understanding the internals. The reason why I wanted to bring this up is just so everyone can kind of understand that, generally speaking, HTML and CSS are coming from kind of two different files and are kind of combined in such a way, even when the HTML is kind of on the same, or the CSS is on the same file as the HTML. So cool. So speaking of that, like there are three different ways which you can use CSS in an HTML file. The first way is inline styling. And so what that means is you're putting the styling right in the HTML tag here, a paragraph tag. The second way you can do it is through an internal style sheet. And so this just means within the head of an HTML file, you add these style tags, which denote that you're using an internal style sheet, and then you're able to change the file that way. The third way is using a external style sheet, which is very similar to an internal style sheet. It's just it's in another file. So let's take a quick look at what that might be. So I have already set up a real basic HTML file. I have my HTML tags, my header tags, my body tags. So let's just kind of write out what we were doing before in reference to internal, external, and inline styling. So if I were just to write hello world, very typical, and I were to refresh this web page, it says hello world. That's really cool. All right, so now say I want to style this, instead make it have using the inline styling. So I could then say, all right, let's make the font size of this paragraph 100 pixels, make it real big. So what does that look like? Whoa, cool. All right, so that's how you set things internally. In the alternative, you could set it in the internal style sheet. So I can just create an internal style sheet by just writing the tag style and putting basically that same exact information that I had before. And so instead we're going to say, all right, for all paragraph elements, let's set the font size. Sorry, what did I just do there? Let's set the font size equal to 100 pixels. And we don't have to have it in quotes anymore because it's in the internal style sheet. So here again we have the paragraph selector, and we have the property font size set to 100. So now nothing changes. So if I were to then remove this, I could, instead of having a internal style sheet, I could instead do something where I would add a external style sheet. So if I were to link to a file called style.css, and it would be, the type of relationship would be, it's a style sheet. and go back to this page. I refresh, nothing comes up because we don't have that file doesn't exist yet. But if I were to add style.css and kind of put down what I had there, so again, the paragraph selector with the property font size value 100, the hello world increases again. So those are the three different ways you can kind of load CSS. I would suggest, generally speaking, you're going to want to go with the external style sheet because there are many times you're going to want to reference just the structure, so just the HTML, and there are other times you're going to want to reference just the style. It's better to kind of separate these concerns just so it's easier to understand. Cool. All right, so those are those comments. This is what comments look like. All right, so similar to HTML, if I wanted to comment and say, all right, this is where my paragraph styling goes. I can place a /* in front of the sentence and behind a */ and then it won't be read by the CSS parser. So you're able to kind of add additional information and it doesn't mess up the rest of your file. So you're able in Atom, the text editor that I use, you're able to comment out lines by hitting the command / button. If you're on a PC, I bet it's similar. I think someone said it might have been Control, not positive. But yeah, it's kind of a nice little shortcut if you just want to, like, even what's kind of cool is when you're going through something, say you want to really quickly get rid of one property, you can just comment out that one, and it'll then load without that particular line. So it's kind of a nice way to quickly debug and go through things. All right, selectors that we are going to talk about. So there are more selectors than what I'm showing you here, but for this week's, I think we just want to stay with like what I would call kind of the basic selectors. And so there are elements, which we have seen. There are also classes, which are denoted by a period here, and the name of the class afterwards, and finally an ID, which is a $. Cool. And so if we were to take a look at those in the real world, in our little toy example here, so we already know what the paragraph selector looks like. Let's instead take a look at what a class of my name would look like. So class, we're naming it my name. We're just going to put delete to Jesse. My name is Jesse. Cool. All right. So if we wanted to select this particular HTML element, we could select it by the class my name and say the color should be blue. Cool. All right. So hello world. My name is Jesse, and now it is blue. And so if I had multiple, we'll just call these names at this point, just to make it a little bit more clear what they are. Name these days. My name is not George. I don't know. Just to kind of keep them consistent. You'll see that the names is now applied to both names. So it's basically anything that has that class name this rule will be applied to. Say I wanted to, instead of having this class here, I instead had an ID which is much more specific, and I would say not my name. If I were to then here reapply it, you'll see that, okay, now that George sentence is not there, so let's add a ID selector of not my name, and we'll say the color is green. So now the ID will be selected. Cool. One thing you might notice is the way I'm naming my variables. this is called, like I think, lower camel case, and that just kind of refers to kind of all the words are put together, but each word except the first word is capitalized. This is how I've always seen CSS variables named. It's the nice thing about having this sort of like naming convention is it kind of takes some mental overhead off of, if I were to have seen this, I might know that this is referencing like a Ruby file or something, because that's the traditional way Ruby things are named. And so what I would just say is kind of like get used to a consistent style of naming your variables, just so you don't have to, it kind of helps you catch when things are in the wrong place, essentially. Cool. All right. So we're not going to talk about a couple of these selectors, the attribute pseudo classes and pseudo elements. Eventually, I will probably get into them. There's like the hover and like the kind of different elements that appear as you like click throughout a page. There's more information here. For the especially curious, we have some links. I forgot about this. Links here and here. You don't have to go in and read those, but if you're interested, feel free to take a look, peruse around. Most of this information, again, like I said, comes from the Mozilla Development Network, which I think is the gold standard for kind of understanding what's going on underneath the hood of your browser. So I believe these links go there too. All right, the comma. When you're declaring the same property on multiple selectors, you can use a comma to indicate that you're just applying the same rules to a bunch of different selectors. Oh, that looks like a typo. Sorry about that. That should not be £. Glad I caught that. That was erroneous. All right, so let's take a look at this. So if we were to look at, say we instead had two classes, names and other names. And we wanted to style both of them in the same way. If we just looked at the website here, you'll see that, my name is Jesse is highlighted, my name is George is not. And so we could add a comma here and type in other names, and now both are highlighted as expected. But you'll notice if I were to remove this, now both names are no longer having the rule applied to them. We'll get into why later, but what I wanted to highlight here is the importance of the difference in how you construct your selector is kind of subtle, but it really affects what's going on. And this is just a simple example, and that kind of changed completely what was happening from one character. So you can imagine as you get more and more rules that it's going to get a lot more complicated and a lot easier to kind of mess up. Okay, so speaking of multiple selectors, let's talk about combinators, which is a fancy way of just saying multiple selectors, and you kind of already saw that. So these are kind of examples. There's no real great naming convention for the names of the particular selectors, so it's kind of better to show these examples. And so the first example is, say you have two selectors without a space right next to each other. So any element matching both A and B at the same time will have that rule applied to it. So let's go back to our example. So here, say we were to combine these two. So now we have a selector which has to be both names and other names. If we go to our index.html, you can see that neither of these apply, so the expectation would be that none of the paragraphs would change color, and we see that that is the case. All right, so what if we said names and other, well, we'll put it down here, it kind of makes more semantic sense. So here, this paragraph now has both names and other names as its class, which matches the selector in the style.css. So if we look here, the expectation is that it is highlighted, and again, it is. So that's kind of like the matching, both matching selected when there's no space or anything between the two selectors. The second one I want to show is a space. So A space B, you remember that kind of ruined our whole example before. What this is saying is that look at B. B is the rule that you're kind of, or the selector that you're matching on, and then as long as you match B, let's take a look up at A and see if you are descendant at some point of A. And so that's a little tough to understand just through words, so let's take a look at an example. All right, if I were to add a division here with a class called all the names. Cool. Okay. I'm going to delete this hello world because it's not really doing much for us. I'm going to delete this as well. And we're going to add animal names here. So what I'm doing here is kind of creating a nested structure where you can see that at the top level you have all the names, and then you have some paragraphs with just kind of specific name sentences. And then you have this last one with animal names, and we'll say Snoopy is a dog's name. I think that would have an apostrophe. I think that's how that works. Grammar stuff. All right. We're talking about CSS grammar. Let's not worry about too much about the English grammar. All right, so let's take a look at what we have here. All right, my name is Jesse. My name is not George. Snoopy is a dog's name. Pretty sure that's there. So the rule that we're trying to understand is any element matching B that is a descendant of an element matching A. All right, so if we look here, we have other names and names. The parent that we want to match is all the names. All right, so if we put parent of all the names, and we say, all right, we want things that are in the class of names in the parent of all the names to be selected. All right, so if we put names here, we're saying that, all right, elements which have a class of names, which are at some point a descendant of all the names, should be colored blue. So now we see, all right, my name is Jesse and my name is George, not George, are both highlighted. So what happens if we have this Snoopy class also be called names? Because it's a descendant of all the names, I would expect that it would turn blue, and it does. All right, so that kind of shows you the descendant matching. The final one I want to show you is direct child. And so if we look back here, Snoopy is a descendant once removed from all the names up here, the parent names. And so if I were to add the greater than symbol here, my expectation is that only direct descendants of all the names are going to be highlighted. And that's what happens. So basically what it's saying is, like, we have this tree of all the names parent, and then we have some names here, and then we have another section down here with some more names. Because we only selected the immediate descendants with the greater than sign, only these are going to be selected and these are not. So those are kind of the basics that you can use to kind of understand what to select. We finally got to the cascade of cascading style sheets. It's what gives it its name. It's pretty cool. And so what the cascade of cascading style sheets really is describing is a cascading algorithm. An algorithm is kind of just a fancy way of saying a way of determining a specified kind of formula for getting a particular output. And so here what this algorithm is doing is saying, what do we apply these properties to given these selectors? And so the order is importance, specificity, and then source order. And so we'll take those each one by one. there's something called importance, which is a kind of like an override button. It's a way of like breaking out of the cascade, and you really don't want to use this. If you're using important, it's what we call a code smell. It means like something, you're doing something that you probably shouldn't be, so kind of really re-examine why you're doing it. It's easy to fall into, especially like when you're first programming, because like it's tough to understand what the CSS selectors are doing, so you might just want to throw in an important to kind of get what you need done. But I'd highly advise it kind of like really understanding why you're doing that, instead using like an ID or something more specific. So if we were going to look at an example of this, say for example, I wanted to, this one's a little tough sometimes to show exactly what's going on. So I'm gonna bear with me a little bit here. All right. So if we do class of names, font size 100, and then a class name of p.names at 120. That's not helpful. We're going to do this as a color, so it's a little bit more clear. But we need them both to be colors. Okay. So color is red. Okay. Well, now I need to make the size a little bigger. Okay. So, oh, is everything okay? Cool. All right. So we have names first, and the color is red, and then we have second is blue, more specific. And when we look at what it turns out being, it actually turns out being blue. That's great. But what if I were to throw an important here? It turns it red. It kind of like jumps the cascade. So even though like you might expect the blue, well, we haven't gotten to this, but like the blue should have rendered because it's the second in the order, and the thing which is loaded latest is the thing that gets displayed. That's why it's kind of like a cascade. The last thing wins. Because you threw I threw an important declaration there, it overrides the cascading behavior. And so this is bad because like you kind of expect CSS to follow this cascading nature, and when you throw importance in there, it kind of like throws a wrench in the whole operation. And so even when I type importance, you can kind of see Adam says, use with caution. Like pretty much everything's telling you don't to use this, but it's there, and it's important to know because sometimes other people use it a little less discriminatory, with less discrimination than they should. The second kind of portion of this cascading algorithm is specificity, meaning how broad your selection is. And so when we talk about elements, we're talking about HTML elements. We're talking about classes, we kind of already labeled those out, and then IDs are the most specific thing. And so if I were to have, so here's an example. When I am talking about just names as a class, and saying that the color should be red. Actually, this would be a better example. So here, when I say, all right, all paragraphs should be blue. And then the next rule is, well, all classes should be red, with the name names. What's happening here is it's saying, because of this kind of cascading rule, classes have more specificity than elements. So therefore, we're going to color this element red because that's the more specific declaration. So if I had another declaration where I said, we'll make it an ID of Snoopy, and remember, you only want to have like one thing with a particular ID. IDs represent one element, or else funny things happen. So now if I say Snoopy should be colored orange, Snoopy is now colored orange because while all paragraphs should be blue, all classes of names should be red. the ID is the most specific thing, and therefore it's going to be orange. And to kind of hammer this point home, if I were to name, like remove this name from this paragraph tag, it's going to turn blue. So it kind of shows you the different levels of specificity there. All right, how are we doing? Cool. So except for IDs, which again, like you should only use on one thing, like however, except for IDs, the latest source for a particular selector is the one that's used. And so to kind of bring that point home, we're talking about names red. What if we said instead names green right after it? It's going to turn it green because it's the latest thing loaded. If we were to look at, cool, specificity for first and then the source order. Inheritance is kind of another kind of funky concept. There are certain properties like color, for example, which make sense to be inherited. And so if you change the font color of a parent element, it's going to kind of inherit all the way down. And so what I mean by that is if I change, I'm going to color all this out and say, all right, HTML color green. And so everything is green because it's actually, every part of the document is inheriting from that top level declaration. But if I were to instead say color here is not inherit, but the other option was to say initial, it's going to turn black because the default is black. And so basically what's coming down saying, all right, everything's going to be green because we inherit all colors, but wait, for these particular elements, we're not. So it's going to go back to the initial version. The third kind of item there is something called unset. And what that does is it looks back to the parent and says, all right, just the immediate parent, and says, whatever was going to happen will let happen. And so that's a little bit weird to say. It doesn't make a ton of sense. So I'm going to show again with an example. And so if I were to set the class animal names to, is that right, unset? Yes. Save that file, go back here. You'll see everything is green. Oh, sorry. A key part about unset is it works really weird with inherited properties. So color is one of those inherited properties. And so we're actually not going to use color for this example. We're instead going to use the margin top. So if we instead name this all the names, and we're going to say margin top is equal to 100 pixels. I'm not going to set this yet. You can kind of see, all right, so now it's shifted everything down all the way to 100 pixels. So if I were to inherit this, because it's not normally an inherited property, you'll see that it actually is inherited and is pushed down there. But instead, if I were to use unset here, it's going to say, actually, I'm just going to do what my parent did, which says no margin top there at all. All right, so where are we at? Cancel. Cool. So here I was going to talk about DevTools, but before, since we're about halfway through, I want to kind of make sure everyone's questions are being answered. So feel free to, I'm going to take a look right now at some of the questions and kind of go through those, and then kind of go through DevTools, and then a quick little live demo about like kind of like a mock newspaper. So if you guys, if any of y'all have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat and I'll try to answer them. No questions? Someone just blink once to make sure that I know you're there. Well, now I'm worried I'm completely disconnected. Oh, blink. Thank you, UpFlippity. Thank you for blinking. I want to make sure that someone was there. Well, cool. All right. If everyone's good on questions, I can continue on. But again, as they come up, as you have questions, throw them in here. I'll have another kind of like question section at the end after I go through DevTools, as well as just kind of like a quick little coding session. All right, I'm going to wait a couple more seconds. All right, y'all are a lot smarter than me. The first time I was learning CSS, I was in a mess. All right. Okay, so last week we kind of used DevTools to examine CSS as like as a way to kind of introspect on a website, and again, I'm going to do that here. So I'm going to go to Codecademy, and I'm going in incognito mode because it's otherwise I'd log in, and it's just easier to kind of show kind of what's happening here. And so what's great about browsers is they have this interactive environment called DevTools, where you can kind of mess with things and kind of see what's going on. And so say, for example, I wanted to see what color this was, this kind of background here. I can click on it, and the styles box opens up, and kind of see all the different parts of the styling that's occurring here. And so if I wanted to see, for example, a particular color, I can use the eyedropper to click on it, and it will show me what a particular color is. So if I click there, it says, oh, this color is E9EAEA, which is a hex value. We'll go over that later, but essentially it's a particular way of identifying colors that's used all over the internet. Say I wanted to look at this button up here, I can do the same thing here. And as I showed last week, you're able to look at links like this and say, like, instead of sign up, say like new users go here. And so you can modify it in place like that. You could also, so here the background color is set to this hex value. I could instead go in there and change it to navy, just because. So if you ever have a question about like how something is being done, or what color something is, or kind of even like looking at particular images, the dev tools are just, they're amazing. Like I can't overstate like how much you can learn about how web pages are built than just through these basic dev tools. Oh wow. Oh, so that's really cool. So here's a fun fact. I didn't know this. So this picture you see here, it's actually not a picture. It's what's called an SVG. Scalable vector graphic, I believe is what it's called. So it's a set of coordinates which are made into an image. And so I didn't realize this. This is so cool. I can change the fill to be like orange. Yeah, woo, hacking. So yeah, that's actually really cool. I didn't know they did that. The reason why you would have an SVG here, a support vector or a scalable vector graphic, is they're a lot more lightweight than images, because you're, instead of sending over all the data which are used to construct the image, you're just sending over the instructions. So it's kind of like, instead of sending the IKEA, the whole IKEA bed, you just send the instructions and you're able to build it yourself. So that's kind of cool. Again, on the Macs, you bring up your DevTools by doing Command Option I. And that'll kind of show you your sources. You can click on elements, and that'll kind of give you a sense of what's on the page. And if you use the selector up and to the left here, you can select on the various elements of your page to understand how they're being built. Cool. High-speed tag pairing is a package add-on to Atom. I'm not sure, Tuggleson, if it is. I thought, like, I'm pretty sure in my Atom I just use pretty standard stuff. The one thing I do use is something called Vim mode, but I don't think it has anything to do with the matching. I think, let's go. Yeah, I think I'm just using the core autocomplete packages. So you might just have to enable that particular one. And maybe autocomplete plus, but I think that's standard. So those are really the only packages that I use. Okay. DevTools. All right. Live coding the front page of a newspaper. And so this is going to be really basic. It's probably not even going to look that much like a newspaper, but the point of this is, I think, to kind of show you where you can use CSS selectors to kind of understand how things are nested. All right, so let's go back to this and delete all of the fun names here. And let's set up what our newspaper might look like. Don't need any of this anymore. Cool. All right, so let's talk about our first heading and say the daily news. Pretty simple. After that, we might want to have, a smaller couple of articles, so we can talk about sports. We can talk about, we'll put tech first, right? Technology news. And we can have like, what do newspapers have? Crosswords, but we can't put that there. We'll put business. Okay, these are just toy examples. So let's take a look at what our web page looks like now. All right. So we have, daily news, technology news, sports, business. So within these, we could add some divisions so that it's clear that below this is the main story, so to speak. And so we can say, we'll have a heading 2, new planet discovered, or 7 new planets, right? 7 new discovered near Earth. Earth. I have a terrible habit of reading every single misspelling I do out loud, so apologies for that. All right, so 7 new planets discovered. We're also then going to want to add another division here to say, all right, this is the big story, we'll call it. The class is equal to the big story. And so it's kind of all neatly put here, and we'll add a little paragraph. And something that's kind of common in typography or web pages as well is a way to just have text look a particular way. Lorem ipsum is one of those things where it's basically just nonsense words that are put there that make it look enough like a sentence so you don't have to think about it. So I'm going to use some lorem ipsum tests just so this actually looks like we're actually writing something. All right, so no, it's not in Latin Google. We're just using lorem ipsum. Looks like I have an erroneous thing there, so we're going to change that. Oh, there it is. See ya. Cool. All right, so that's where our technology news goes. So this is, again, just a little bit of like housekeeping. Like, I'm just trying to make everything organized enough so that it's easy to understand. And that's also the importance of kind of spacing. You want to make sure that your tags are spaced in such a way that you can kind of easily read what's going on. All right, so these are the other stories. Cool. All right, so say I wanted to add a tagline tag underneath here for both of my news stories. So I would call this a class of tagline. And I'll also add a tagline to a little bit of technology news as well. We'll do this here. No, that's not right. We'll say new Apple product release. Because that happens sometimes. People will buy them. All right, so now I have kind of this simple setup in two different taglines that are, never translate this site, we don't want to see that anymore. All right, so we have daily news, 7 new plants discovered near Earth, 7 new plant, did I repeat that? Sorry, everybody. We'll just add a real tagline of everyone is thrilled. Cool. So what we don't want here is, like, this doesn't look that great, right? Like, so we have this headline and we have this everyone is thrilled bit. But what's strange is, like, it's not that different from the actual text of the article. So what we could do in the style is say, all right, for all of our taglines, let's instead label, let's make them font size of 10 pixels. Let's see if that's too small. It's a little small. Don't want it that small. You know what? Maybe what the problem here is that our article text is too big. So instead we have let's change that to be a little bit smaller. So our article text is now, like, we'll make it even smaller than that just to make it look a little bit better. Cool. So now we have, like, this newspaper section with our headlines, our subtext, and then our article text, which is a little bit smaller. And what's nice is each of the particular each of the sections kind of is similarly sized. Perhaps we should make the headline, the daily news, we want to make that really big. So instead of calling that, instead of making that an H1 tag, let's make that a paragraph tag and just have it as the ID of our newspaper name. And what we're going to do is add and make this really big because, I mean, that should be the biggest thing about our newspaper. This might be ridiculous. Oh, no, it's not. Oh, that's why. So this is a common thing. I selected it as a class instead of an ID, so I'm going to do that instead. Cool. So that's okay. So that is a little ridiculous. The problem was I had such a small. I was zoomed in so much it looked a little weird. So now I have this huge, like, the daily news headline. I can see, like, 7 new planets. Everyone's thrilled. Technology news, new product released, and you can kind of see this formatting happening. Say I wanted to only color the. We'll add some article text also to this just so it looks a little bit more newspaper-like. And we should probably add, since this is called technology news, we should also put something called like the big story here, just so it has a little bit of symmetry. Oh, sorry. Cool. So you have that kind of same symmetry there. Say, for example, you only wanted to highlight the text that is here, which is under the big story, but you didn't want to mess with the Apple product text. You could add an ID, or you could use the inheritance model to kind of select that particular piece. So here we have the big story. So we can say, let's look at the things that are paragraphs under the big story, which are also the article text. Let's make the color green. Ooh, sorry. So wait, sorry. This is under the big story, also under article text. Did I spell that incorrectly? It's also under. So let's take a look at our DevTools. Just to kind of, what's also nice is it'll kind of show you what you can use to select this. So this is actually, it's p.article text. So what I want to do here is something like this, right? That's what I was expecting to see. Maybe I was having trouble seeing it. Blue. Okay, blue might be a little bit easier to see. Interesting. So, oh, CSS. It's so specific. You need to know what you're doing. So what I was doing here, when you put two things together like this, this means that the element has to be both of those things. What I had expected, what I was actually trying to do was select things which were under the big story and had the class article text. And so now you can see it's back to green. We'll make it blue. It's one of those things where like you really need to like be thoughtful about your CSS, as I am proving, in order to select what you want to select like that. Say instead I wanted to select a particular, what I guess what I should point out is what I screwed up there is when these two items are together, the reason why this article text here is not highlighted as expected is the article text isn't a class of the big story and article text. It's only a class of the article text. And so if I were to add the big story here with a space, and spaces are the way, by the way, that you are able to add multiple classes. Spaces are just a way to separate it. This should then turn blue, if that makes sense. So again, it's important just to be really specific about how you're writing your selectors, or else they're just not going to behave the way you thought. Let's add a quick picture here, just because that always looks nice. So images of planets. What were they called? This 7 new planets. Okay, so we can go in here and grab, that seems simple enough, not too big. We can grab the image here and go back to our page, and let's add a simple image. Source, you'll remember, is kind of the way you name where the image is coming from. Then it's a self-closing tag, so you don't have to have like an opening closing tag, you just have to have the opening one. And cool. So now we have our image here of a particular size. We can also style our image. We'll just say this is our, we'll call it a class is equal to headline image. And if we want to style the headline image, we could maybe, reduce the width to 500 pixels. Now it's just a little bit more readable. And obviously this isn't super pretty. Like we haven't really gotten into colors or positioning or any of like the kind of the real tricky stuff like the box model. But I think this kind of gives you a basic framework of ways that you can select particular parts of CSS. And like this is the foundation. Like you really want to hammer home and be able to select various pieces without using CSS. And kind of once you get these basics down, you can move on to kind of the more complicated positioning stuff, which we'll move on in the later weeks. But I think this is kind of like a great kind of basic tool set to get you started in understanding how to select the elements you want to using CSS. With that, I'm going to take a couple of questions maybe. If y'all have some, we have a couple of minutes. I know I covered a lot, so I'll ask your question. I'll answer any questions you have. So feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll get to answering them. In addition, kind of like last week, I am going to put all of this up on my GitHub. So you can find that link at the end of the presentation. I'll have this link up there as well. But if you just look for Jesse Lou-Marie, I'll post it in the chat again. Just like last time. I don't have it there yet, but I can put it there right now. Let's see. Oh, Codecademy ready. That's the link to kind of all the different materials that I've used. I'll save everything that I kind of wrote up now, and then you can also see the presentation there. But yeah, feel free to ask away. I might have to ask Upflip to blink again, just to make sure everyone's there. Okay. Well, if it's pretty straightforward, that's great. I'm glad y'all have that. Again, like if you have where I got a lot of this information, and I tried to document like kind of throughout. I don't know if you noticed, there'll be spots within here. Well, like I'll say like from MDM. Like I really try to show like where I'm getting my sources from. Like it's just great. Like this website has a ton of information. If you run into things and you kind of have like a greater interest that you want to get further down, like take a look at this website. It's amazing. It's a lot better than, in my opinion, than W3 for information. W3 Schools comes up a lot. I would not recommend. I would just recommend going to Mozilla. It's just a lot more comprehensive. Oh, can you not click on it? I think if you click on it, you'll be able to go to it. Rich. Yeah. There you go. Cool. Well, excited to see what everyone does with your CSS knowledge. I'm glad this is straightforward. Yeah, let me know, I guess, if you have any questions. But yeah, that's kind of the very, very basics of CSS. Okay, we got one question. Cool. Cool. I looked at the lesson to kind of like give me a sense of what to teach, but I really didn't get super specific and do it. I kind of look over the weekly lesson. Cool. So you're curious what's behind that. I would take a look using your inspector. So if you can kind of like bring up the Chrome inspector just by opening up and taking a look there. I'm guessing it's probably Bootstrap, but let's see. Yeah, it looks like I'm not signed in right now. It'll take me a bit. But yeah, that's what I would just say up FlipD. Just take a look by using your inspector, your web inspector, and kind of check it out. If you have more questions, feel free to kind of bring them up next week. I wish I had that up. Sorry about that. Oh, I just have to go to codecademy.com. Sign me in. It's like positioning using images backgrounds. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Yeah, CSS can do a lot. Like it's actually, I guess the one thing I'd want to say, like you can build, like it's more than just a display language. You can actually do some like transitions and animations with it, which is kind of cool. And you don't even need JavaScript. So a lot of people do try to build as much as they can using CSS. So that's kind of cool. Cool. All right. Not seeing any more questions, so hope you all liked it. Feel free to let me know, like in the feedback, if there's anything you need or anything that I didn't cover. Other than that, have a great week. Good luck, and I'll see you next week. All right. Take care, everyone.